welcome to House Einstein Podcast 49. I am Osman Parvez, your host of the House Einstein Podcast, and with me is Hamish Crabb.
Hello, hello. 49. We're getting there.
Podcast 49. Think about all the hours we've already put into podcasting. It's pretty remarkable that we still have things to talk about.
Who would have thought? It's like real estate's a constantly evolving industry, right?
Who would have thought that this asset class has so much depth and detail to it?
No, it keeps
going. All right. Hopefully we will keep you entertained and educated in this podcast, but according to our legal advisors, we are strongly encouraged to inform you that this podcast is entertainment. It is not legal advice, spiritual advice, marriage advice, or real estate advice. It is purely entertainment. If you are a client of the House Einstein brokerage, which is based here in Colorado, please reach out to your House Einstein agent directly for advice on your real estate situation. Clients, you can call me. I will drop what I'm doing to attend to your real estate needs. All right, that is the disclaimer. But our mission at the brokerage and in this podcast is to help you be smarter about real estate, to make a smarter real estate decision, and hopefully have some fun along the way.
Oh, I bet we will. And I'm excited to jump into the sales of the week this week. Looks like there's some good selection, so yeah.
Some good stuff in that, and there's some interesting news, and today's topic, well, let's go through the topics.
Yeah.
That's probably what we should do right now. And as usual, we're going to talk a little bit about market conditions. We're going to touch base on some of our buyer and seller needs at the moment. We're going to talk about 4 different properties in the sales of the week segment. These are recent closings that just happened here in the city of Boulder during the last week. And we're going to talk about some interesting real estate construction rules that may be changing around embodied carbon.
Yeah.
Something that I only heard of recently. Embodied energy and embodied carbon. And then I almost said the meat, but this is Boulder. So the tofu of the podcast will be our discussion around, I think I need to get another beverage, around due diligence. That is what we're going to spend most of our time talking about. And it is something that very few agents will get into with their clients, and possibly for good reason. And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. I think it's a solid week, solid podcast lineup. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, a lot of things have been happening. All right, market conditions. So in the last few podcasts, we've talked about the high end extensively and arbitrarily defined high end as over $3 million in the city of Boulder. And in that market segment, fewer than 10% of detached single family houses were under contract last week. We were at 8%. So that meant 92% of sellers are sitting around waiting for an offer. And as summer starts to move through peak season and into the fall, sellers are likely going to start capitulating and considering taking a much lower price than they would have earlier in the year. And clearly there are lots of signs of market slowdown, including some of my colleagues that are posting their personal experiences on their social media or sometimes in real estate broker groups that are not often visible to the public. We're seeing a lot fewer showings and the market start to cool off dramatically. And as was the case last time in the last cycle, 2006 to 2009, maybe early 2007 to where it bottomed in 2009, it was top-end driven, meaning the market starts to adjust from the highest price points down. And we're absolutely seeing that. But this podcast, we thought we would talk a little bit about that mid-range and arbitrarily defined it as $1 to $2 million in the city of Boulder, single-family houses. And when you look at that data set, you will find there are about 34 listings No, I think I've opened up a new window, Hamish. I'm going to do it again to make sure we got it right. Because I got a little... Well, let me do this the other way around. So originally I was going to talk about 1 to 2 million, but then I opened up a new window looking at all the price changes. So there are
yep.
that 34 listings in the last 2 weeks have had significant price changes. In some cases, very large price changes, like 1590 Sumac cut the price $800,000. And granted, they were radically overpriced, but they've cut the price from 10.5 to 9.7.
Wow.
But we're seeing quite a few price adjustments. 633 College Avenue, $250,000 discount. 1838 Mariposa, $320,000. 435 Erie Drive is just cut the price $200,000, and that's a listing I just looked at with buyers. I can't go into details about my thoughts about these listings, other than to note the obvious. There's lots of price changes. I can't do that because of the rules that regulate the real estate industry that say on a public forum you cannot comment about the attractiveness or lack of attractiveness of these listings, other than to point out obvious price changes that are happening in the market. If you want to know what we really think about listings and you're a client, just call us. And then about once a month, this is going to be once every 2 months right now, our newsletter comes out. And in the newsletter, we pick a handful of listings, typically fewer than 12, that are actively on the market, and then go into them in depth. But for the podcast and other public forums, we limit our commentary because that is a real estate rule of conduct that we all have to live by. But for private email communication to you in our newsletter, that's for prospective clients and active clients. You actually can be a realtor and sign up too, which is sort of funny. There's quite a few that do. We will talk about, in that newsletter, we will talk about active listings to some extent, but only selectively. So that's what's happening in price adjustments. Now let me do the analysis again. And this time we're just going to look at detached single-family houses. And we're going to look at, rather than do City of Boulder, if you're following along on the MLS, we're going to do Boulder proper. So this means cutting out Gun Barrel, which was built much after most of the city of Boulder, as largely a neighborhood that served IBM employees. It's a little disconnected, so we're going to call Boulder proper, follow along Cherryvale, up 61st Street. And I fully acknowledge that there's pockets of unincorporated Boulder County in here. But from a buyer's perspective, I have yet to have a buyer that says, I got to have City of Boulder. I can't buy Boulder County, even if it's an unincorporated pocket, something up against Flagstaff, for example. There's a bunch of unincorporated Boulder County there. There's a bunch that is just north of J Road. The Orchard neighborhood. There's also sorts of little pockets. Not the Orchard neighborhood. It's a street called. Don't get confused with Orange Orchard. There's a little pocket that is off of J Road that includes. Actually, I'm going to exclude that little segment. But near the airport, there's a bunch of stuff that is unincorporated Boulder County too. So let's talk about what's happening in the $1 to $2 million price range. And detached single-family houses only, no attached property, no townhomes, no condos. And in the $1 to $2 million range, there's 105 listings on the market right now. And of the 105, only 28 under contract, so 28 out of 105. So that's 26%. So slightly more than a quarter of available inventory is under contract, which I've been looking at this a long time.
That's even less, yeah.
Been tracking market data for a long time in the city, and we're seeing a lot of options for buyers, even in that $1 to $2 million range. And that is refreshing for buyers, agents, and buyers. You now have a lot more selection. But when you are in the field looking at these homes, what we've seen quickly is that below 1.2, there's very little that is really that attractive. 1.2 in this sort of segment, which is not quite entry level. It's like a little step up from entry level. Entry level is like the $750,000 very basic Martin Acres Ranch.
Call it
South
like
Boulder
mid-range. Yeah.
It's almost, it's like slightly above entry level, but not quite mid-range. The median sale price in Boulder is 1.5. So technically you're right. If we did, one standard deviation from 1.5-ish, you probably would get this number. But under 1.2, it's very hard to find a house that is really worth buying. It's compromised, it's really beat up, it's got tons of deferred maintenance, or has not been updated in decades. But starting at about 1.2, you start to see some more attractive properties. So in practice, what you typically find is that even in this $1 to $2 million range, the most attractive homes are going to sell very quickly, and often for more than list, often with more than one buyer interested in acquiring it. So that's why this is sort of a tale of two markets, because some of those homes, it's like, this is going to sound very gender normative, right? But
I don't even know what you're going to say.
Maybe I shouldn't do it. It's too risky. Don't make the cliche. I'm just not going to do it. But the attractive property gets a lot of interest, and there's lots of others that are out there that potentially could be fantastic deals. And we're actually going to start talking with one of our clients about that. And we'll touch base on that with our buyer hype in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, they're next.
Perfect
Let's just segue
segue,
right
yeah.
there.
Let's
Okay.
go.
So we've talked about that slightly above. It's not quite mid-range, or maybe it's lower mid-range, that $1 to $2 million price range, and how there's 26% of homes are under contract, meaning 74% are available for buyers to put an offer down and negotiate a good deal. And now we're going to segue to what some of our clients are looking for. And this is a classic example. We have a client who is really an advisor to our real estate firm. I've known him for almost 20 years, and they are seeking a rambling ranch, and they would like it to be turnkey. So they would like maybe 2,500 to 3,500 square feet max. Prefer most of that to be on the main level, and like a 2-car garage, and like it to be fully updated. And we're not just looking in the city of Boulder, we're looking into Boulder County and Louisville and Lafayette and Superior. And they've also considered going as far south as Golden, which we can help them do. But what we're finding is that and so their price range is probably up to 1.8, and they could go significantly higher, but I think they're comfortable up to that price point. They're finding it really challenging to find a home that has been updated and is effectively turnkey. What we're seeing is a lot of homes that are cheap flips, have been badly executed, with lots of paint overspray and poor finish quality. They look pretty in the pictures, but then you get there and you're looking around, and all the issues are obvious to the naked eye for anybody who knows what they're looking at.
And they'll then serve some of the ones a daily reminder too, if you do run with that property, right? You see it every day.
Well, yeah, you'll see the poor execution. Like the home I'm in right now, and you can't really see it, but you can see some of the trim in these photos. It is so well done. The builder, everything is lined up. There is no exposed nail heads. Where they put in the finished nails, they very carefully plugged it with wood and color-coded the wood plugs. They are the same color as
that's really cool.
The wood. Like it is so nicely done. The finish quality is so obvious when you know what to look for. And so we're seeing a lot of cheap flips that are not worth buying at the list price. And we're also seeing some homes, occasionally homes that are worth buying but aren't quite right. And the ones that aren't quite right are getting multiple offers. So what we're going to likely do for this buyer first is we're advertising them, we're marketing them here on this podcast. We're telling you this couple are out there looking, and we're telling you what they're looking for. We've targeted Fraser Meadows pretty closely as one possible neighborhood because that's the land of rambling ranches in Boulder.
Is. Yeah.
But most of them are not updated enough. Most of them are not in great shape. So what we're looking at doing is possibly helping this client manage the remodel without becoming a GC. So what that role is called a buyer's rep. And basically it means visiting the property weekly, doing a video tour, and being the middle person for discussions with the GC and the subs, verifying materials are on site. And that way our client can continue to live the lifestyle they want to live, which involves travel, and other things that are occupying their attention at this time. And we can help them manage the stress and load of dealing with a significant remodel project. So that's now also what we're looking for, is no longer just a turnkey ranch, but possibly a ranch that needs some work. And I'm going to have a sit down with the client hopefully this week to kind of lay out, at least on a napkin, what this looks like. And this particular client, because they're so trusted and so close to us, we're willing to extend what we normally do to try to build a relationship and skill set that could benefit us too. It's also a win-win for us. So
yeah, really excited to kind of see that develop and be a part of it. Yeah.
And Hamish, you would be, because there's no way I can do like a weekly tour of the property with a camera every week doing a 30-minute video. But at the same time, we do these videos for our buyers anyway. We're getting faster. We have the systems. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. We're gimbaled cameras. We look for things in detail. You can't turn it off, right? When we're looking at homes for our relocation clients. So I think it's fortunate.
Well, I'm in my house now, and I'm looking at
right. Well, the cobbler's children, right? Your own home is a whole different story. But now that you know what to look for, it makes shopping much faster and easier. And we see things a lot of people don't. So walking through the house and pointing out all the visible and obvious flaws, and then having that video available for our clients to look at remotely. We've been doing that for years and sell a couple of houses a year now. It's effectively sight unseen, like at least the offer is written before the client actually stepped foot in the house. And that's really helpful. But now we're talking about extending that to somebody who's here with this buyer's rep business model. It may actually require me to go get my GC license. So I'm also looking at that too. I've worked construction. I'm pretty sure I could get my GC license. It's just a little bit out of the wheelhouse of the real estate brokerage. So I need to think carefully whether I want to also be a GC. Years ago, I worked on a development on Nantucket, and the architect was also the GC. He created a separate company so that he could manage the build out. And I don't know if he did other projects after that, but that was part of his vision, was I'm going to design the home and then I'm creating a build company to build it. And there are quite a few design build companies out there, but most of them aren't started by an architect.
I could see it being beneficial because the age-old engineers versus architects battle. I could see that kind of being decent.
Yeah, GC versus architect, 100%. Yeah. People on the ground that are like, how does this work? I've seen it the other way around, where the build company has decided to get into design work, right? And I'm pretty sure, and I may be going out on a limb here, but I'm pretty sure that was how Sobo got started. Was they started doing remodels, and they realized that the design work that most people want isn't major surgery and doesn't necessarily require an architect. And so they became a design build firm. Perhaps they have architects on staff now, but this particular thing I was involved in went the other way, architect to build company. And we're talking about real estate brokerage that functions like an advisory firm, more like investment advisors becoming more like GCs. But I think it might be what we should do and experiment with this particular buyer. So we'll talk more about that, Hamish, maybe at our team dinner tonight.
And we may keep you listeners updated as it develops. We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. In any event, it's not something that is scalable, right? It's not we're not looking for investors for this brilliant idea.
Yeah.
But that's also what we do. So we are very granular, we're very hyper local, and very fixated on. Yeah, we care about due diligence, we care about fiduciary responsibility, and it matches up that Venn diagram. Like, does this service work within the wheelhouse of our ethics and our values? And I think it does. But at the same time, it might leave us scatterbrained with, okay, now we're managing a construction project, or it feels like we are. So, all right, let's move on to other buyer and seller hype. And we'll go through these pretty quickly, because otherwise this will end up being another 2-hour podcast.
I was going to say, that one, there was something interesting to talk about, but I think these ones will be a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hamish, I no longer see the timestamp on this new screen that I'm looking at for our podcast recording. Just FYI, normally I try to keep an eye on it. So
I am so glad that I have it still. That would be terrible. Yep, I've still got it.
Good.
We're at 20 minutes.
Just double checking.
Yeah.
So other hype, we have a dentist moving to the area. He's looking for a home in Table Mesa for him and his family. And they are pre-approved, ready to rock. moving from the Texas area. We're excited to be working with them. They think Table Mesa is the right answer, but they're starting to realize that there's other good schools outside of Table Mesa. And that's sometimes a realization that buyers have. I mean, the test scores show Table Mesa is off the charts because of Mesa Elementary and Bear Creek, but Creekside has been making progress and improving radically. And it's, in my opinion, there's more than math and science scores to the story of whether the school's a good fit or not. But they would like a family house, so they're hunting for that. And then we have a buyer who would like, I call these properties the fantasy hobby farm, right? This is that location between Boulder and Longmont, along the diagonal or along US 36. So typically between the diagonal and US 36, although sometimes they're off to the east. And that zone is dotted with these historic farms, some of which have water rights, many of which do not, and many of which have been already converted into luxury homes with hobby farms. That's what they're seeking. They would like space from the neighbors, and we would like to help them find a property. But so far, the market has not shown us anything that was compelling. They don't want a major remodel. No. They are willing to do some work, and they're really savvy, so they're not going to overpay for anything. But they are willing to pay fair value for something unique and interesting. So that fits their criteria. They say they want to downsize, by the way, and we keep looking at homes that have like 5 bedrooms, so I don't know if this is really downsizing, but I get it, right? They have adult children. They want to have the ability to host at family gatherings, and so with the number of children, well, that's
kind of how it goes.
5-bedroom, you need the ability to sleep 5 bedrooms for them. So I get it, but then it's in conflict with this vision of smaller house.
At least my vision of it, right, would just be like a bedroom for me and living space. But I'm not thinking in terms of having a family and family hobbies and all that too, right? Yeah.
Different phases of life,
Hamish. Yeah, no kidding. Quite.
Yeah. You have the nest that you now own, and you're feathering it.
every now and then.
Right. But you don't need space for the grandchildren or the children to come visit you. So I get it. That totally makes sense. We feel the pinch at our house when we have our friends and family. We have 2 guest rooms, and it's really not. I mean, if we were going to design the home from scratch, we probably would have a 3rd sleeping room. But we have 2 guest rooms and 2 offices, which works for our lifestyle at our personal home. Yeah, that's pretty plenty. Yeah. But it's, that's something we do with our clients is we are a sounding board and in some case a therapist for what they're trying to achieve. And that's an unwritten service area that a lot of real estate agents end up doing is basically being a counselor for their buyers and their sellers to get through this stressful and challenging process of buying or selling a home. All right, those are our buy side. Let's hit our one. We're only going to talk about one seller this week, and that is Spruce Canyon Circle. So let's pull up the address on this one. Hang on one second. I think it's 11851, but my brain is feeling a little... Yeah, okay, I got it off the top of my head. I did not pull up the listing prior to the podcast.
I'm used to the numpad, right? So I just know the pattern. And so some of them I have to start typing the address before it comes to me. It's kind of weird. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, the pattern recognition. So this is a really nice 3,150 square foot home, originally built in the 90s. It's our listing, full disclosure. It's on 2+ acres of land, and it's a 4-bedroom, 4-bath in Coal Creek. And the location is just... like it feels like a mountain getaway, but is still in reasonable proximity to the city of Boulder. It's not priced the way that some of these second homes are priced, meaning that it's within the reach of a lot of potential buyers at a list price currently at 1.3. And it doesn't have to be a second home. It can be a primary home, but it really is just one of the most tranquil properties we've had an opportunity to list. In fact, we represented the buyer when they acquired the home, and they've got a couple of younger children that have... they are now the seller. The sellers now have a couple of younger children. It's been a great family house. There's a giant play set in the back. There's a carriage house above the garage for guests, so they don't have to be in your space. And they added a great room over the main level, and that has really, I think, it's added a very attractive feature to the architecture. So it's a unique and interesting property, but the mountains are a little slow. So just want to encourage people that if you're thinking about shopping for a mountain home, you may want to hop in the car and take a look at this one. It's a property we spent quite a bit of time looking for. And so I know its value based on how rare it is to find something this functional and that's designed well for family living in such a tranquil spot. I mean, that backyard glade is really...
Isn't that insane?
Really magical. Yeah. You know, when you walk in and you could see through the house into the backyard and with the view into the glade, that see through when you first walk into the home, this house has it. And the updates they made, I think, are very tasteful. And so go see it.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Absolutely worth a look.
All right, that's our buy and sell side hype. Let's talk about sales of the week, of which only one is ours. So this podcast is not all self-promotion. I always think about the old Car Talk podcast, the shameless self-promotion segment that they always had.
Just always. I haven't seen him.
Oh, well, this is way past your age, Hamish. The Car Talk was a NPR show. And it was hosted by two brothers, and they would go into detail on all sorts of car-related topics, right? Particularly repairs, and they would get people on to talk about what's wrong with their car and what they should do to fix it. And they would have these people make sounds, like your car is making what sort of sound? Oh. And they'd have these people on the air making that sound. It was pretty funny.
Okay.
And also honest. I remember listening to it when I was like 10 years old and loving that show.
Oh, cool. Was it like a self-promo though, I guess?
No, not at all, except for one segment where they're like, okay, it's now time for our shameless self-promotion.
Oh, nice.
Come visit the Car Talk website and buy our hats or whatever. It was really funny, right? And so I feel like a little bit like our buyer and seller hype is a little shameless self-promotion, but I'm going to actually write that in there.
It has to be.
Into the show notes.
Yeah.
And we can think about whether we want to keep it as shameless self-promotion. But it is true. These are real buyers and sellers that we're working with that are looking for certain things. And as all buyers and sellers, they're finding it not so easy. And the smart ones take a while to find the right property. You really, or have a really clear vision of what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Selective,
there's no, as I tell our clients, there's no rush, right? Like we're not in a rush. And our winner for record time holder took 3 years. And that's also the same person looking for the Rambling Ranch, by the way. Yeah. He's our record holder for how long it took to... Yeah, very patient. There's nothing wrong with being patient. Sometimes you have to move fast when you know what you want and it hits the market. We just had a situation like that this week with a buyer but I still drag them to go see the alternatives, even though they didn't ask for that.
It's like honorable mentions, right?
They were like, we think we want to buy this house. I'm like, great, let's go look at the alternatives. They're like, okay.
We just need to dial in, make sure we're on the same page. Yeah.
That's called fiduciary responsibility, right? Like you want to give people the advice they need, not what they want to hear. And if they still feel they want to buy this home after they've seen some alternatives, then I feel better about helping them negotiate a good deal and guiding them through due diligence. But at least I did my job. I showed them some alternatives. Okay, so let's talk about sales of the week.
Yeah.
And Hamish, do you have anything to add about the hype before we jump in?
I think that's about it. That Spruce Canyon listing is really cool. It's absolutely worth seeing. I already said that, but I really like the drive up Coal Creek Canyon, and so I'm a little partial. But yeah,
it is a fun drive. You also had fun filming the video with the seller's kids hanging out.
Yeah, I gave them a master class. Yeah.
In drone operation,
real estate videography, but
that's right.
I think we're ready to hit the sales.
Okay, let's do it. And I'm opening up the listing cart as we talk to sales of the week. There they are, and there are 4 of them. And we're going to go in price order from most expensive to least expensive and walk through a little bit about each of these properties, starting with location for each of them. So the first property is 340 17th Street. It closed on June 14th, so that's just 5 days ago. It was listed at 3.35. and it was under contract within 2 weeks. So it listed at the end of April.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, it was locked down, and it just closed at 3.2. So $150,000 discount to the list price. But, of course, as a percentage, let's just do the math really quick. 3.35 over 3.2 minus 1. So a very reasonable 4.7% below list. So that's not... So as you move up in price, the negotiated discounts typically get larger. And this listing had been available for a couple of weeks, and somebody locked down a negotiated discount almost 5% below the list price. Not horrible. And were there additional disclosed? Yeah, pretty. I mean, actually, it seems like a pretty decent deal. And there were no additional disclosed concessions. It was not a cash deal. But let's talk about this location. So this is just east of Chautauqua. So as you are east and south of Chautauqua. This location is really nice. It has what I call social trails. I guess most people call these social trails. It's not something I made up. But there are social trails right at the end of the street that can lead you into Chautauqua itself. And the hiking in this location is largely overlooked by those that don't know. I happen to know because I lived
off the back of the street, right? Not Chautauqua. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, you get into Chautauqua through the social trails, into the trails behind Chautauqua via these social trails. So when I lived in Martin Acres for many years, we would cross over Broadway and go up Kohler Mesa and do a loop and then come back down, go through Enchanted Mesa and then come back down through this neighborhood. And it was one of our favorite evening walks. And that's one of the, I mean, in addition to helping buyers and sellers for 20 years, and including in this neighborhood, but the walks through it really help you get to know neighborhoods. And this particular house, originally built in 1990, had a pretty extensive update. So if you flip through the photos, it's just really, really pretty. Like every aspect of the home is just, it's turnkey, right? Like, and the staging looks fantastic. None of this stuff likely belongs to the seller. The seller is working with a relo company. So this is where the executive gets relocated within the company, or maybe it's a new company that's hired an executive. And as part of the package, they say, look, we're going to handle the sale of your house. We're just going to cut you a check, and we're going to cut it for this number, and we're going to try to get more than that, but it's guaranteed. We will handle entirely all of the process, including guaranteeing you the sale price. And that's part of I've seen that happen with an investment firm I worked for, and whether or not the executive deserved it is an entirely different subject. But they moved him to France.
Jeez.
They moved him to France. They bought his house. My company, we bought his house, gave him a check, and moved him to France. Paid for the entire relocation, and sold the house. It didn't matter. The company never once blinked at taking a loss on the house because they just needed it sold and move on. Like, this was all part of getting the right executive, all part of the comp package. So that was the deal with this particular listing. But the house itself, I mean, it just checks almost every box except for that one car attached garage.
Good point.
So it has 5 bedrooms. Go ahead.
Oh, no, good point. I just noticed the one car. Carry on.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. That's, I mean, for $3.2 million and you have one car garage is a little bit painful, and the lot size probably won't support the addition of a wider or deeper garage, but it's a reasonable size house, 4,200 square feet, 4 bedrooms on the upper, so it's a 2-story house, 1 bedroom in the basement, 4 bathrooms. This is what the vast majority of buyers that are looking for a family type home want to get. This is in their head, the mental model of the perfect American house. It's not excessively large. It can house the family. And it's in one of the best neighborhoods in town, particularly with the close proximity to Chautauqua. And honestly, it's a bit of it's an open secret, but the social trails through here are just phenomenal. So the neighborhood, I would say, used to be better. So if you head to the east, there's a shopping plaza. And that shopping plaza has just been becoming more and more derelict. Whole Foods used to be there.
Well, they just did like a facelift or something. They like put wood paneling over the signs and made it look, kitschy and neat. But
Whole Foods invested over $1 million, and then a year or two later just bailed out and decided to do it again in South Boulder, and that's what's happened. But that really left a gaping hole in the
plaza,
in the plaza, in the commercial space. And so there's been a handful of tenants, but it's been in decline. We like the Taj. We love the chicken. All the different flavors of chicken in their lunch buffet, and there's a liquor store, and
there must be a liquor
Maywa,
store. That's a requirement,
right?
Yeah.
And that corner closest to see you has a bagel shop and that sort of thing, and it's fine. But the plaza itself is sort of dysfunctional with how the flow of traffic goes through it.
Yeah, it's a hazard.
And if you redevelop this thing, and this is not what we were going to be spending I didn't think we were going to be talking about this, but if you redevelop this puppy, you're going to have some of the best views ever from like a rooftop deck. Like, this is a huge redevelopment opportunity in the future. You're right next to CU, and I would love to see a really nice restaurant with a rooftop deck here, but who knows if it's going to happen. I don't know who even owns the plaza or the other parcels that are dotted along in here. There's a bank, there's like a Wendy's or something similar. I can't remember because I never go there. There's a bunch of things in this spot that are very unique, but so all of that's been in decline, and that was only 5 or 6 blocks away from this house on 17th Street. But I think it's going to, over time, that location is going to get better. And if you're on the south side of town, you can easily hop on US 36 and get to Denver or get to the airport far easier than North Boulder.
Yeah, you're right there next to Baseline, the main kind of onto 36.
It doesn't have the cachet of Newlands, right? For some reason, Newlands, with its north-south facing avenues and views of the Flatirons and easy access to Alpine, the shopping center at Ideal, that typically sells at a significant premium to this particular neighborhood. But there's a lot of things that are in this neighborhood that are worth considering. Officially, it's Interurban Park, by the way, but it's just, some people call this Lower Chautauqua. I just think of it as the Chautauqua neighborhood. Well, this is Chautauqua. Lower Chautauqua is the other side.
Right.
And then there's, of course, the historic cottages in Chautauqua, which are an entirely different animal.
I'll say this, like, southern wing of kind of like the Chautauqua neighborhood and area is a little bit kind of quieter, too. I know we checked out a house for some clients a year back, and I'm just driving through it. I don't have a whole lot of experience in this area, but I quite like it. Yeah. Do you have any notes
Hamish,
about the agents?
Nope.
Okay.
Not going to say anything about the agents, although I've worked with both of them many times. But what I am going to talk about, though, is the SPD, because it is available publicly. And they mention some things that might interest you, including that they had to have a structural engineer out in 2018 to look at the wall on the west side of the house because there's a giant crack in it. And that crack occurred after the renovation that added a bunch of space. So, those cracks, you got to look carefully at them. And an engineer is not a bad choice, but I recommend a particular structural repair company. Our hit rate has been very good with them. And I mean, they've even gotten engineers to change their opinion, which that's something.
Yeah.
So yeah, always read the SPD. All right. That's our first deal.
Yes. On to the next.
If I can find the right window, maybe you should introduce it. Okay, there it is.
2303 Bluff Street, Boulder.
This listing is evidence that you can lose money in Boulder real estate.
Who would have thought?
And when you hear your real estate agent or any real estate agent say that Boulder real estate only goes up, I want you to remember all the examples we've shared with you on the podcast, and this one in particular, that yes, people can lose money, particularly if you buy at the peak and then feel compelled to sell when the market is trending downward. And as I've noted before, only 8% of listings last week were under contract above 3, and this is one of them. And so the story of this house, let's back up. The story of the house is that in 2022, which some of you may remember the spring of 2022 being the peak of the market, this home was listed at $3.9 million. And the market did not immediately respond to it. And after a few weeks, the seller cut the price to $3.75. And then about a month later, nothing happened for a month. And then a month later, the right buyer came along and they negotiated aggressively. and they got the price down to 3.4. They acquired the home for $3,425,000, closing in July of 2022. So now let's fast forward, not even 2 years later. So this is almost 2 years, right? So we're shy by 4 months of 2 years. Or 5 months of 2 years. So let's call it a year and a half and a month. They put it on the market, and the agent they recommended is great. She's very talented and capable and has great communication. And I'll mention her since I'm just singing her praises. Mary Beth Emerson was the list agent.
Not the first time,
listing
too.
agent. Is it really? I've mentioned her before. I'm not in love with her.
Not that much. You don't need the disclaimer yet, but I'll let you know when it hits like 6 times or something.
I mean, just because we're both into sailing and have MBAs and have some shared friends, I just really like. I think she's very competent at what she does, and we're colleagues and we are competitors too, right? Like I would have stolen this listing from her all day long, and she would have done the same to me, but she didn't need to. She got the listing, so she listed it at 3.5, and that was probably after some tough talk with the seller, who's like, I don't want to lose money, and the reality is they paid too much in the peak of the market, and the market is saturated.
Yeah.
The market's saturated with $3+ million listings right now. So even though it's in a great location, it's saturated. So let's talk about that location a little bit more. Bluff Street. This street is east-west, I guess it's sort of southwest, northeast oriented, right? It runs parallel to Mapleton and Pine Street and all the rest of them.
I'm pulling it up now,
and it sits right below what used to be called Lover's Hill. Right, so the hill of Boulder kind of creeps up, and then suddenly it goes up steeply up to Alpine and Panorama and Balsam. I think geologically that's an extension of the Valmont Butte, but I'm not a geologist, so geology people, please correct me in the comments. Yeah, chime in and tell me how wrong I am. But that's what it looks like to me, and it's an extension of that geologic feature. And this is the corner of 23rd and Bluff. So this is where you drive up into the Panorama circle and have all those killer views. So it's a home that's very visible when people drive up to it, and those in the neighborhood are really going to know what this house is. And it's in the Whittier Historic District. It's a landmarked home, or no, it's not landmarked. It's a landmark.
Oh, okay.
And there's a distinction. Actually, no, it might. It keeps being. I gotta check on whether it's actually. It's mentioned twice the word landmark. I mean, that's a word that you got to be careful with, because it means certain things if it's landmarked, but we'll save that for another podcast. So the house itself, originally built in 1875, and then Elton Construction redid the home and did a great job.
Yeah, no kidding. It looks absolutely gorgeous.
Right.
We should almost, there's a particular listing in North Boulder that we've been watching, and the seller's overpaid on it in 2022 as well. I wonder if it's almost worth having like a series of like the 2022 woes or something. Yeah.
So this home is landmarked. It's the Perry White House. I'm sorry. The choice of landmark and landmarked were a little confusing. So this home is absolutely landmarked, and that has some interesting implications. It also has some potential tax benefits. Landmarking is something that is rarely done against the owner's will, but has been done at least once in the city of Boulder.
Like forcefully?
But this particular house, they didn't want to landmark it because it restricts development even more, right? Like it's in the historic district and it's landmarked. Now that doesn't stop you from doing things inside. And luckily the owners of this home did not destroy it inside. They, all the finishes and choices of fixtures and colors are complementary to the historic nature of the home. So this is a really attractive home. When you get a modern interior in an historic home, it can sometimes feel like, sneakers with a tuxedo. It just doesn't match quite right. I love how there's the Boulder Theater is in the photo stack, but it's a great home, right? But the seller clearly lost some dough because they were unable to sell it at close to 3.5. After 41 days on market, they had to cut the price. They cut it to 3.5, and shortly after that, sorry, they cut it to 3.52. That's a raise, not a cut. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at this closer now. I'm like, 3.352. It is a cut. Okay, my brain is. I'm like reading numbers. I don't know what's going on with my brain, but lately the dyslexia with the numbers. So it was 3.5. They cut it to 3.52. So they basically knocked 150 off the list price. And that was in April. Nothing happened. And for another 45 days, another month and a half until somebody locked it down. And it eventually closed at $3,158,812. Very specific.
I was going to say, yeah. You don't often see that.
And it could be numerology, or it could be that the inspection revealed something scary, and that was the exact number that the buyer said, I want it taken off. Yeah. And maybe that's what happened. I don't really know the story. But it's also interesting that the home was heavily marketed with owner financing. I mean, it's in all caps. That's not usually something somebody needs at the $3 million plus level. Listing. But well, I mean, look, the reality is rates affect everybody.
Yeah.
And if the seller is willing to go with a really low rate, in other words, if you can put your $3 million in the bank and get 6%, and you could borrow from the seller at 3%, well, that's a no-brainer, right? But it didn't appear that's what happened. The buyer paid cash and paid $3,158,812. Now, let me look up the old listing really quick, and I just want to see how different it is, because Mary Beth mentions 2024 amenities, right? So incorporated modern flow and top-of-the-line amenities. And she put the year in, which I think is very interesting. It very much suggests, boy, the kitchen was redone or there was investment into the home. And the only way to know is to look at the old listings. And also, once you're under contract, you can also ask for a list of all the improvements that the seller has made. Yeah. Boy, some of these photos look like the exact same composition. And no, that looks like the exact same amenities. I think these weren't 2024 amenities. These are definitely the amenities put in by the previous owner. So curious. It's interesting what listings suggest. Yeah, curious, right? Mm-hmm. And let me reiterate, listing language is not designed to be a technical review of every aspect of a home. Listings are designed to get buyers to come see the home. And the choice of language might suggest that everything's brand new without saying everything's brand new, because that creates liability. So you could say the best of 2024 amenities, right? Like, you're just basically saying everything's current. And it is. It is current because it was all chosen to be compatible with a historic home. And that's, I think it's a great listing. I think the mistake was just that the seller overpaid in the peak of the market. And then they clearly wanted out. So remember, they paid 3.4 and they sold it for 3.159. And so when people are losing money, by the way, it gets very personal. 3,425 minus 3,159. So you're talking about $266,000 before commissions.
Yeah, I was going to say commissions too.
Yeah. So and sellers are very, very reluctant to take a loss. Like, it's just psychologically painful. But that doesn't mean everyone does that. And this listing, having been on the market almost 3 months, was prime for discount, a low offer and a buyer that's ready. And we're going to see a lot more of that this fall, particularly above the $3+ million range with 92% availability. Like, now I'm sorry, it's lowball season above $3 million.
Yeah. No, it's not a golden rule and it's not a hard and fast rule, but 5 years minimum holding type of mindset when you go into purchasing. At least that's how I was looking. Like, am I going to be comfortable here for 5 years,
Stuck in this horrible, historic, gorgeous home right in the center of town, 10-minute walk to Pearl. It's such a horrible place to be stuck. But I hear you, Hamish. 5 years is what I often tell people. At a minimum, if you don't want to lose money and you even bought it at the peak, waiting 5 years is a good idea. you're very unlikely to lose money. But you could also argue the dollar is dropping in value and we have inflation, so that's counteracting that argument to some extent. And better to take a $260,000 loss now in dollar denominated value than dollars that are worth even less in 2 years and take a $250,000 loss or a $200,000 loss. You can't. There's no crystal ball on what was going to happen. But the house itself is great. I mean, they did a fantastic job remodeling it. I don't like the 1-car garage, but that's because you and I, Hamish, are car people. 4 bedrooms, 3 on the upper, 1 on the main, so it has that main floor bedroom or office option. I don't know if that was the primary or not, but cool property. And that's the best part, is that it's a cool property.
Yeah.
I don't feel particularly bad for the sellers. They made a business decision to get out, and they did. So, but this is an example of how to lose money, and in this case, $266,000 plus commissions on the sale of a home.
Yeah. Very nice. And the next one, I already clicked over to it, and I'm looking at the leading photo for it. It almost looks like 2 houses. And that's important because of what's mentioned in the listing description, Osmond.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 855 Union Avenue, and thanks for keeping us moving, Hamish.
Gotcha.
Large lot. So this is in northwest Boulder, so you're west of Broadway, and you are north of Wonderland Lake and south of Foothills Community Park. This is a really special spot. However, most lots are pretty small, like closer to 7,000 square feet. What's nice is that the lots are north-south oriented, which results in far better interior light and more options for passive or active solar. And unlike Newlands, which is mostly east-west, you get this north-south thing happening in this particular pocket neighborhood.
And if that interests you, check out 605 Alpine Ave, our listing, which also features north-south orientation.
That's right. And also features an opportunity to be in close proximity to parks, and definitely already takes advantage of solar. Yep. But this particular house, 855 Union, what immediately caught my eye is that it's on a 14,000 square foot lot, which is pretty much a third of an acre. And that's on the west side of Broadway. And sure enough, the marketing of the listing spills the beans that it has subdivision potential. And there are many, or at least a number of $3+ million homes in the neighborhood. So this is the type of property where somebody buys it, subdivides it, and builds 2 luxury $3 million houses. So it listed and was sold under contract almost immediately. Days to offer 1 day, which means that likely the offer showed up the same day that it was about to go active, or a buyer heard about it before, because it's a different. So we're looking at different brokerages. This is arm's length, but clearly, well, I know the agents involved. These are top agents in Boulder, and we know each other. And if you happen to know you have a developer in your pocket, and I'm about to list the house, and I know that you have good relationships with developers, I might be calling you just to check in. And I think that's what happened here. It was listed at 1.65. It sold for 1.5 eventually, and it was listed as having subdivision potential, which doesn't mean necessarily it's subdividable, and there's all sorts of rabbit holes to go down for that. But it apparently is. If you look at the plat map, you could see what the neighbor did, which had an almost identical lot, and $750 each for the dirt, with a $3+ million likely sale price of the finished products, which could be 2 to 3 years away, right? This is not banking on today's $3+ million market, but by the time the 2 subdivided homes so this house has to be deconstructed, the lot has to be subdivided, and deconstruction is expensive, and then you have to have your new homes that are going through planning and permitting. There could be buyers attached to those projects, or they could be built speculatively, but likely will have $3 to $3.5 million price tags when they're said and done. $750 for the dirt and $1 million for the construction, maybe $1.5 million for the construction, still leaves you almost $1 million of upside potential. It just takes a builder with deep pockets or a developer with deeper pockets and are willing to risk it. But if you know this market and you know you're looking at west of Broadway between
Wonderland
Lake and Foothills Community Park, it's not exactly the highest risk in the world
Yes.
to take on this project.
This my first time in this neighborhood was when we were filming the Riverside Ave video, and I was just like, it is so beautiful. You know, the trees, everything. It's summer, so everything's in bloom and gorgeous. But I love the houses. I love the trees, the foliage. It's a really cool one.
It's magical open space.
Yeah.
Okay, when you go from our listing on Riverside under that tunnel and it opens up into this Wonderland Lake open space, and the bike path, it's gravel and it wraps around on a sunny afternoon. It is. We just did it yesterday because we had 2 days ago we attended the concert in the park in Foothills Community Park, and we rode right past our listing on Riverside through that tunnel and up through this neighborhood and into Foothills Community Park, and it was just like so idyllic and beautiful. So it's very emotionally fulfilling, this neighborhood. Now, by the way, we have not mentioned anything about the house, and that's because it's irrelevant.
Good point.
Other than the fact the home was built in 1960, which unlikely to have any resistance by city planning to scrape it. It's not pre-war. It's in dilapidated shape. There's tons of single-story ranches. There's really no protection for them. So you're not taking risk that you're not going to get your permit. It's pretty unlikely. I mean, they still do some review, but it's more like desktop review. It's unlikely you're going to get caught because it was somebody, historic or deemed to be important to the city that lived there, right?
Well,
it could happen. That can happen.
Do we want to
but not likely.
talk about the last names and the public history, that side of things?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, we noticed...
I have to dance around, because I don't want to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even think the square footage is right, by the way, on this listing. It says 2328. That home, the left side of it doesn't have a basement. So maybe it is...
Yeah.
It almost looks like two homes in one, right? Mm-hmm. It looks like two houses squished together, two standard Martin Acres ranches squished together. That's what this home looks like. Anyway, let's talk about what Hamish was alluding to. The seller's last name is Paris, and they live out of state in New York.
How do you know that?
And then when you go, because we look at the history and we look at the ownership on all of these listings, sometimes just to make sure I'm not...
I didn't know it would tell you where they're actively living, though. That's...
Well, it tells you their tax address.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I didn't Facebook.
I was going to say,
or anything.
Like...
Well, I look at these things because if we're going to offer low on a property and it's a owner that's out of state and they have had the home in the family since 1990 or earlier, so we're talking about 20, 35 years in the same family, and the name of the subdivision is also the same name has the same owner name, Paris is again here. It makes me think this is maybe the Paris family. Well, they may have owned the entire neighborhood and subdivided. One thing I didn't look is how big is the Paris subdivision.
Oh, good point.
So that is something it's pretty easy to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so go to Boulder County's website, and it looks like it's only this lot, Hamish.
Oh,
this lot is the
that's
Paris
much
subdivision.
less exciting.
Yeah, and it might. Yeah, so it's not exciting. It wasn't the Paris family that owned everything in town. It's just this particular subdivision was called the Paris Subdivisions. But why is this lot its own subdivision is sort of fascinating. Yeah. Let me see if it's going to load up something different and make sure. We'll give it a minute here because it could just be Boulder County's website's really slow. No. Okay, so here it is. All right, I'm going to share screen. Well, no, I'm not going to share screen. I'll just describe it. So the Paris subdivision was the two lots to the north of it as well. So at one point, there are three properties, two to the direct north and one that fronts here on. So there's two on Locust, 860 Locust, 870 Locust, and 855 Union. Once upon a time were all one lot.
Just a big square.
And the Paris family, huge, a giant rectangle.
Yeah.
And the Paris family subdivided it into three lots at some point in its history. And we could go really deep down the rabbit hole and figure out exactly when that was, but it doesn't matter. Because likely this lot is subdividable again. This one, the large lot to the south, which is the subject of this this property, 855 Union, can also be subdivided. So that's high probability, but may not have been 100% certainty until you get that letter from the city saying your subdivision is granted. And that's something we're actually going down the rabbit hole right now with another client. We won't talk about that particular deal, but we'll share what I shared with them yesterday, and that is that we can give you that high probability. We can connect you to an architect that's done it before. We can connect it to you to land use people. We can show you the preliminary application to do it. But we cannot give you in writing that this is a guarantee until the city does it. Because the city is the city. They might, who knows what reasons they could throw at you that why you can't do it. But at some point, there's risk and return, right? The dirt is $750 a lot for a reason.
Yeah.
If it was already subdivided, it could be $850 a lot.
There's like, Newlands, right, has super small kind of lot sizes and larger homes on it. Would this area be conducive to like a massive home on the entire lot itself, or kind of are you more strung in, maybe somebody wants a massive estate or kind of McMansion-y thing?
Yeah, good question. Do you have to you don't have to subdivide. You can just keep it. So our opinion listing years ago, right? 3 years ago, 3120, I think was the address. That property.
4170.
4170. Oh, man, so wrong.
I have to verify.
That property, I think you're right. Just saying it, I think you're right. That property could also be subdivided, and we got enough evidence to strongly support that, and that added to the valuation of the home. And
mercifully, they did not that? So far.
Yeah. Would you do that, or would you rather have this private garden, like this giant lot that you can enjoy with yourself and your family? It's totally the owner's decision. So it could easily have been, you're right. It could have been bought by a home developer that's going to build one luxury home on it. We don't know who bought it. We don't know if it was a developer that's building 2 future houses. But that's the economic.
That's what it's giving, yeah. To use a Gen Z
that's
term.
The back of the envelope.
Yeah.
That's the investment thesis. But there's another investment thesis that says I want a south-facing giant lot or north-south-facing giant lot. And no, this is south-facing. A south-facing house that is a mansion. I wouldn't use the word McMansion. That's kind of a dirty
no, it's a little bit more demeaning.
It's a real estate slur. We don't. All right, so that's the subdivision. That is 855 Union. And one of the important takeaways is if you are trying to do this, you want to work with agents that are well-connected, that have done lots of deals, and are willing to pick up the phone and call, willing to do some legwork to find you what you're looking for, particularly if it's something like a giant lot between Wonderland Lake and Foothills Community Park.
Right. And not last but not least.
Last but not least, our meager little listing.
Really cool listing.
Oh, all right. It's set a record.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 2892 Shadow Creek Drive, Unit 212. When the buyer approached us looking for an investment in 2017, we told them about Gold Run and why it checks the box for the future, particularly if you have children who might attend CU, and it will not have vacancies that last very long because of its location, and there's only a few floor plans in Gold Run of 2-bedroom units that are like this one. And I can't remember, did this building burn down? This might have been one that burned down. Let me double check the year built. It has sprinklers. Yeah, so Gold Run has a history of fire. And that's just reality.
Yeah, I just like the delivery.
It's a stick frame construction building, this development full of students. And today the students the fireplaces are all decommissioned. You can't have gas-fired appliances on the back patio. You can't be barbecuing any appliance on the back patio. There are all these rules to reduce fire risk, but a few years ago, one of the buildings burned. I don't think it was this building, but this building did get sprinklers, and it has a very large and open floor plan. We're talking just under 1,200 square feet, which is bigger than most South Boulder ranches. It had one car underground, and it has relatively reasonable HOA fees, especially when you factor in all of the amenities at the club and the health facilities. The closest thing to it is the Peloton.
Yeah.
Right? When you look at what the Peloton has to offer, that's on par with what Gold Run's association has to offer. And I would argue Gold Run's in a far better location, right on the bike path, and with some things that the Peloton doesn't have, like volleyball courts, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of things to like. The stick frame construction is not one of those things, because you can potentially hear sound transfer that more so than you would at, say, the Peloton with its construction that was designed to minimize sound transfer, the concrete and steel that are in the Peloton. But this unit, when you look at it on a dollar per square basis, or actually when you look at it on a, not dollar per square, but total sale price of any 2-bedroom unit that was exclusive of the top floor, so not the penthouse on the 3rd floor, they're different animals. For 2nd floor units or 1st floor units, this has set a record.
Yeah.
Nothing even came close. So it sold for list with a slight discount. I think there was a minor inspection issue on a window or something like that, so we gave them that to repair or replace the window. And it sold relatively quickly. It was on the market only about a week before we had an offer, which, interestingly enough, always makes the seller a little bit like, did we leave money on the table? and I had to show him, no, you're getting a fantastic deal. He did. I didn't tell you that. He messaged me. He's like, wow, that was fast. Did I leave money on the table? I'm like, no, you didn't. We went through the comps in so much detail, and then we staged it. You, Hamish, helped so much with the marketing of this home and the videography of this home.
You filmed some of your clips are in there too.
Some of my clips made it in, and we got it sold basically at list price very quickly. And I wanted to buy it. I ran the numbers. When he bought it, I wanted to buy it. And now when he sold it, I wanted to buy it. But the numbers didn't make any sense because of the interest rates. I couldn't get close to cash flowing unless I threw down like 70%, just based on how high the association has gotten at 610 and the current rental market. It just, my risk appetite I've been trying to buy a unit at Gold Run for years. And when I found this one for the seller in 2017, I was really kind of sad because it checked, at that time with rates where they were, it checked so many boxes. And I just wish I can't, so when I represent buyers, they come first. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to scoop you if I represent you. If you're my buyer, I'm not going to steal a listing from you. You come before me, but I really wanted to buy this particular property, and the staging looked great. And I mean, even though the bathrooms were a little dated, the kitchen's original.
It still showed well.
It didn't really matter.
Yeah.
It showed well. The floors had been redone. That really helped because one of the tenants, so he tried to manage it himself the first few years, and he had these tenants that trashed the place, and we ended up replacing the flooring with LVP to limit the possibility of that happening again.
That's some of the best
anyway, fantastic.
LVP I've experienced. I didn't realize that it was LVP. I thought it was really nice flooring.
It looks like hardwood. Yeah. So, Hamish, you added this last bullet.
We got it. I don't think we need it.
Well, so what you meant is, so the last bullet is proper communication of value in our marketing materials. And the value proposition we've already covered in detail, but we haven't covered how important it is to not just tell people, I'm like banging on the mic, not just tell people in the write-up, but show people. That's why there's photos of the bike path. That's why there's photos of the gym and the pool, because people really, and the volleyball court, people really need to see the access. The elevator. I don't think I've seen a photo of an elevator in a Gold Run listing, but that is such a key distinction.
A huge feature.
So there's a bunch of 2-bedroom units in Gold Run. Some of them don't have elevator access or garage parking. Mm-hmm. And when you see the photo of the elevator, seeing is believing. And that's why those photos are in there. So, all right.
No, I think really, really happy with this one. Happy with all of them, but still. In the news.
The article is in the Boulder Reporting Lab, and it is titled Boulder Pioneers Colorado's First Energy Code to Reduce Embodied Carbon in Buildings, which has to be the longest title ever. Tim, who's the author, and we know, and I doubt he listens to this podcast, but just thought I'd mention that wow, that's a long title. But basically, The gist of the article is that Boulder is looking at including embodied carbon in the building code. And at this point, they are just looking for incentives for embodied carbon, which are the emissions, basically the emissions released from creating the steel beams or creating the cement or building the drywall, right?
Like production
what's actually put into
emissions.
Right. The carbon or energy actually that is embodied in the manufacturing process varies by material. And that is not something that's ever really been considered for building codes.
Yeah, for a long time,
So-
these used to be regarded as like hidden costs or environmental costs that weren't factored in economically. And seeing them kind of come forward, right? This is one of the first initiatives, I think, in the country. Yeah.
So this is called, or at least to be called, green points. And you got certain points by doing certain things, like installing a heat pump or putting in solar panels. And now they've included this embodied carbon as potential points for residential or commercial building. And there isn't a ton of detail exactly on how this is going to work. So I've got a lot of questions about exactly how are they measuring embodied carbon. And what's really funny about this article, so back up, I have worked in construction personally, and I worked initially as a roofer, and then worked briefly, worked for a longer period as an entry-level carpenter. I was horrible at roofing. I'm scared of falling off roofs, and I'm really careful, 3-point contact at all times, and that really annoyed the owner of the company. And so he took the first chance he had to replace me. He fired me, which is fine. That's the construction industry,
So
right? He was not a great boss.
Yeah.
I also was not a great employee and didn't really take the job seriously, but I did take the carpentry seriously, and I lasted a lot longer in that position, and I learned a ton about construction. But one of the things I was shocked by was the sheer amount of waste, the amount of things that end up in the landfill, and the amount of waste in the new materials, like all the things that are cut, all the wrapping paper. There's just so much garbage that's generated on a construction site, and it's really sad. So it's nice to see this particular idea on how to reduce the impact of embodied carbon emissions, and without it being regulatory by treating it like a point.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do this, right? They're talking about climate-friendly building materials, but they're not reducing. So here's the thing, right? It's not just the embodied carbon in the new material, right? Like you have a choice between concrete and laminated timber. Yeah. Well, obviously the laminated stuff is going to be far less carbon intensive than concrete. Concrete is very carbon intensive to manufacture, and steel is very energy and carbon intensive. But what about the embodied energy in what already exists, right? So when you tear down a building, there's a huge amount of embodied carbon in that old building, whether it's a house or a commercial building. And this article doesn't actually look, as far as I could tell, this new code, this new points option doesn't look at the embodied carbon in what's being torn down. It's only looking at it in the choices of what's being constructed. Or did I get it wrong?
You're right. It doesn't overtly say anything. The leading picture, right, is the Boulder Community Hospital being torn down. And I think the implication is that, they're trying to reuse or make whatever works. Kind of more that segues a little bit further in the article. They bring up that they're also reducing demolition requirements for a remodel. So if you have something that's got a high embodied carbon already, and you file your permit to remodel, if you don't remove that piece, say you got a big concrete island, and you don't remove that island, then they make it a little bit easier. I mean, this is all before it's put in action and before it's spelled out, right? But it looks like there is some nod to it. And then a little further down, they bring up spray foam. And it's I was a huge fan of it until I read this thing, and maybe I need to read a little bit more. But apparently spray foam, being an excellent insulator, also kind of leaches into whatever material it's sprayed onto. And so the ability to reuse that material is essentially lost. That said,
but that's not what
how much you're reusing anyway.
That's not what they're talking. Well, that's not what the article is saying. Yes, that's true, Hamish. I agree with everything you
Okay.
just said. But what they're saying in the article is that it's not just the reuse of the foam, right? It's that the cost to manufacture the foam is higher than the energy savings it will ever produce.
Oh wait, really?
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no,
Like you insulate a house,
missed that.
and the cost to manufacture and install that foam far exceeds the energy savings that will ever come from that foam.
That is brutal.
And that is something to think about, but it's also who bears the cost. And external costs of construction and manufacturing, externalized costs are borne by society, are borne by the environment. And so unfortunately our code is sort of dumb.
Yeah.
And because it benefits the homeowner, we don't often think about the externalized costs in some of these construction
And that's the
material.
the term that I meant to say. I was saying like hidden costs and stuff. External costs is totally what I was thinking of. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm glad to see Boulder exploring this, but the reality is also on the ground, Boulder has some of the most complex code in the country, and it's getting more complex. And that itself increases cost massively for renovations, remodels, new builds, which makes housing less affordable in the city of Boulder. So a lot of our approaches at the regulatory level are in conflict with each other. And it's nice to see at least an acknowledgement of some of the conflict in this article by Tim Drugan.
What's the there's a quote and it's like something about like some of the worst things come from the best laid intentions. It just reminds me of that, like we have some really good codes, but maybe sometimes the execution isn't there, some great laws, but sometimes the way they're implemented isn't ideal.
Well, it sounds good on
Yeah.
paper, but spraying foam throughout the cavities of the home makes the other materials essentially unusable if the cost to manufacture spray foam and install it is higher than any potential energy savings that will ever be incurred. And the carbon that, it just goes on and on. I feel like sustainability is not so easy to measure,
Yeah.
but it should be a lot easier than this. And it's just Boulder Code has just gotten really complex, and it looks like it's about to get even more complex.
So I wanted to just loop this in as maybe like an honorable mention or something. Up near Loveland, west into the mountains, there's a massive project called the Chimney Hollow Reservoir Project. And it's this huge dam that's being constructed, and the idea is to pump a bunch of water from the western slope over to the eastern slope to serve more people. But a dam, right, is it's not a dam, it's a reservoir, and it's not stopping an existing flowing body of water. Anyway, that's going to use a ton of concrete, and right now they're quarrying up the reservoir from the dam and using all on-site materials for concrete, for rock, for everything. And while the project's happening, it's the largest quarry in Colorado. But that's like, I'm talking about embodied carbon and everything. That's a cool thing to see, is concrete made on site. You have less logistics,
That
less
is cool.
construction on the street, everything like that.
I'm glad our society is talking about embodied carbon and embodied energy. And I think it really took on some steam with Tesla, because people were,
It seemed like a lofty goal.
It seemed like certain types of people were very in your face about the cost to manufacture lithium batteries.
Still are.
And the quarrying, the mining cost, and the carbon used for mining, the fuels burned for mining, and how it led a bunch of others to come up with research that showed it would take like 7 to 10 years before you're at break even.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're still at break even at 7 to 10 years. And it also reminds me, we'll go back to Car Talk.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the Car Talk book and them making the case that people frequently buy new cars or newer cars because they're just tired of fixing their old car. But the cost to replace the transmission once will pay for more, like that's not like 3 monthly payments, right? Like think about every month you're replacing this part in the new car. So if you could stick with the old car, it's actually far less cost intensive to your pocketbook. It's a fantasy to think you're saving money by buying a new car, and the same is true with new homes. It's not the real reason why people make these purchases, and definitely doesn't encompass the embodied carbon already in all of the existing homes and vehicles and manufactured products. I really would like to see society move towards long-term, durable, sustainable goods.
Yeah,
but it's just
less planned adolescence. Or adolescence.
It's the opposite of obsolescence. Yeah. It's the opposite of fast fashion.
Yeah. No, we're here now and we're having the conversation. What I would like to see is a push towards energy efficient retrofits for existing cars on the road. I'd like to see, EV initiatives for things that are already on the road. I don't think we need the entire new production for everything. There's safety standards that are changing, and that's going to be a tough one to keep up with. But, we got to start looking towards what we've got, not what we can build.
I think so. I think our society needs to move there. We need slow fashion, not fast fashion. We need re-engineering of existing vehicles and frames, not brand new manufacturing. It's just such a hard push because people are attracted to shiny and new, and maybe that's why I like historic homes that have been remodeled on the inside. Like, they're so livable and so nice, and you accept the fact they have small closets. You accept the fact that your maintenance costs are going to be higher because it's a historic home.
That's gracefully the less is more lifestyle.
Yeah, and it's not in your face ostentatious consumption. Maybe that's why I find that sort of consumption so kind of morally offensive. With social media people, they're running around and showing off
latest
their
and greatest
jet-setting lifestyle, and it just feels something's off that bugs me at a very human level. But we have gone afield,
yes, we have,
from our real estate related topic, and we only have one more to go, and that's the segment called "Tell Me Something I Don't Know." Although I would argue a lot of people probably haven't heard of embodied carbon and embodied energy to begin with, but. So this is the second Tell Me Something.
It's a 2-for-1 today, listeners.
That one might have been a blend of in the news and something you might not know. This is very unlikely that you know this. So the question, the topic is all about due diligence in real estate. So Hamish, what is a real estate agent's responsibility towards due diligence?
To my understanding, a real estate agent is not supposed to advise on such matters related to due diligence.
Strongly discouraged by the regulators and the attorneys that represent real estate agents. They are strongly discouraged to say anything about due diligence. Don't walk into the house and say, boy, this house looks like it's in great condition. And then the week after closing, the plumbing breaks because you said it was in great condition.
Yeah.
Mr. Realtor.
Then you're on the hook.
So I've heard the attorneys in classes say, don't ever talk about condition. And I struggled with that when I first heard it because I felt like, well, what's the value?
Right.
What are real estate agents doing? What are we doing? Are we just putting people in cars and driving them around?
And we've covered the contract and the negotiation side of things. We're not just doing the car thing. But
of course,
yeah.
So due diligence is not a duty of a real estate agent to a buyer in the state of Colorado, and that is how it is. However, I think that's ridiculous, and House Einstein is actually built to support our clients' due diligence. And when I heard that, and I talked to my attorney about this is problematic because that's what we do, she said, stop doing it. And I said, we can't. That's our business model. How about we write some sort of disclaimer into our buyer agency agreement? And so that's why our buyer agency agreement says, and I'm paraphrasing, Osman or whoever is on the team using this verbiage, Osman may provide limited investment advice, limited due diligence support. Buyer acknowledges this is not a normal duty of a buyer's agent to their client, and buyer agrees to assume full responsibility. And buyers strongly advised to seek independent experts to complete their due diligence and investment analysis. So even though I've got this background in investment analysis, I was hand-tied by this decision at some point that realtors don't real estate agents don't provide due diligence support, don't provide investment analysis. And I said, well, F that.
Yeah.
We can't do that. That's not our business model.
That doesn't sit
So we
right.
added this. Right. So that's the backstory. That's House Einstein's mission, is to help you make a smart real estate decision. And due diligence is absolutely a key component. And as Hamish said, we already covered contract writing, and we've covered property selection to some extent too.
We'll probably do it again.
We probably will talk about it again. And we've covered negotiation quite extensively in this podcast. In fact, our last topic was all about negotiation. But we haven't really, so I'm going to back up. I said we've covered property selection, but superficially. It really falls under that heading of due diligence. So there are 2 stages to due diligence. The initial stage should be all about neighborhoods and property type, price range, schools, location, distance to commuting, right? Like how long does it take me to drive to the airport or to the office, to my cousin's house that I have to go to once a week, whatever it is. That's all initial due diligence. That's what I consider stage 1. You don't need to go see the house for this, right? We are just doing initial due diligence. I've got a bad knee. I know I should only buy homes with primary
superficial
bedrooms, or my elder. Right. Well, this is stuff you should know before you pick up the phone and schedule a showing, right? Or pick up your mouse pad. And
however it works.
It used to be
these
phone
days.
calls before you
Before
schedule
the smoke
a showing.
signal.
Stage 2 due diligence is all about looking. Well, first it's a bottomless pit, and by that I mean that due diligence is done to the extent of the buyer's concern. So you go, in other words, you go as deep as you need to go until the buyer feels like we've gone deep enough. I don't need to go any further. I see the minor crack in the foundation, and Osmond said, okay, this is what I've heard from all the structural people we've talked to. If it's a pencil width and there's no dislocation and it's not horizontal, you probably are fine with injecting epoxy into it and sealing it. A professional should probably do that. That is unlikely to be a major structure, especially if there's no other signs of shifting, right? You held a very long, this is an important detail, a very long level up against the foundation. It's level, right? It's plumb. It looks good. There's just this superficial crack. Well, that's probably not a dangerous thing. And what I would say to a buyer is, I have to say this, you should go consult an independent expert. Here's the number for a structural engineer, or here's the number for a repair company. This is probably what they're going to tell you. And so far, that's exactly what they've told the buyer. So it's bottomless, right? And at that point, is the buyer satisfied? Maybe they're not. Maybe they want to talk about the composition of the concrete, or if there's enough rebar in the wall. I have no idea how you figure that out, but we can go down the rabbit hole as deep as our buyer wants to go. But they decide that we've gone deep enough. And over the course of 20 plus years in this industry, I've developed a list of due diligence areas that I share with most of our buyers that want support in due diligence. And there's like 23 different areas on that due diligence list.
It's pretty extensive. Yeah. It's a really cool kind of resource to have on hand. I mean, you don't want to give away all the secrets, right?
We're not going to go through the whole thing on this podcast, but it covers all sorts of areas. And of course, you want your primary home inspection. You want your sewer line scoped. You want the radon tested in the home. You may want to have a mold test, particularly if the home has any sign of water damage, or if you particularly have a mold sensitivity. And even if you don't, if you just say the word, should I do a mold test? My answer is, well, you should probably do a mold test if you feel you should.
Now you asked.
However, historically, most people don't, and we live in a really dry climate, and you need moisture for mold to continue. And most mold problems, if you find one, can be solved. But you tell me, if you want a mold test, that's also now something that is routine for inspectors to provide. We also have secondary companies that do mold testing. They do a better job. They also can fix mold, not just test for it. So mold is a really important. Some people have horrible sensitivities and major health issues from living in homes that had mold issues. I don't begrudge that. If that's an issue, let's go down the rabbit hole and get it solved. Sophie just closed on a property that this is maybe last month, and her buyer had significant mold sensitivities, and they terminated it on like 3 or 4 different deals, and they did their own mold testing. During the showing, they were taking samples from surfaces by touching it with a sampling cloth and sending it in to see if there was any sign of particular strains of mold they knew they had allergies to. Non-invasive, not scary testing, people, so don't go suing us because we took a surface wipe of a countertop to see if there was mold.
What but go ahead.
No, keep on. Jump in. I think I've said enough.
This isn't necessarily. We speak to clients, and then there is kind of like a professional following too. One of the struggles is you want to go with due diligence, kind of like you said, as far as the buyer wants to go. So you don't want to be dismissive, and at the same time,
That's true. Okay, so there's another piece to that, and I guess that's what's normal and reasonable. Right? And I think it's reasonable. In most cases, you want a primary home inspection. You want a secondary inspection on items like the roof, the sewer line, the furnace. If it looks like the primary home inspector has discovered something that they don't feel confident about and they want you to go get a secondary test on something, you should go do those. Those are 99% of our buy-side deals have those components. Now, not all of them do mold testing. And not all of them are looking at other sorts of tests, right? Like the inspectors will sell you a floor scope photo of every room in the house. I'm not sure how much value that actually has. Right. But
could be
now
cool
you know you have uneven insulation in your ceiling.
I do.
I can tell you, the seller's not going to dig out. Right. The seller's not going to tear apart the walls to even out the insulation.
Right. So it's like, sometimes you can do inspections even just to kind of plan ahead. I think I know of some buyers recently who were doing a lot of inspections just to kind of think about what they'll do once they get in the door. Yeah.
Right. That's fair enough, too. You may want to have a contractor visit the home so you can talk about opening up doorways and installing ramps if you have a mobility issue. That's all legit. If you want to have the paint tested for lead-based paint, okay. It's not usually an issue unless it's peeling. Yeah. But when you do renovations and you atomize all the paint in the walls because you've got your crew with the Sawzall running,
it's a little less.
You may want to know if they're creating lead dust for you to inhale and your family to inhale. So there's all these issues you should be thinking about. But it also creates a future disclosure issue for you. And if you went and paid, this is something that's like the gift that keeps giving. You paid for the infrared camera test, and it shows uneven insulation in the wall. And you demanded the seller credit you $2,000 for it, and the seller said take a hike. But guess what? There's now this paper trail. You know about it. You thought it was a big enough deal that you objected to it. The seller said take a hike. You bought the house anyway. And guess what? You now have to disclose that to potential buyers, particularly due to the paper trail that you yourself created for something that you never intended to fix, that you knew isn't really that big of a deal, uneven insulation in one wall. Or the insulation settled. Yeah. And maybe you can hold your hand to the wall and feel the warmth and say, okay, let's get this insulation fixed, because cellulose insulation in walls does settle. It's just the question is, are you comfortable or are you not comfortable? What do I think is ridiculous? I don't think anything is ridiculous if it matters to our buyer.
That's the right answer. Yeah.
And we had a buyer a few years ago where sound was really critical. And in the drawers behind me, I have a sound pressure level meter that I bought. And
I remember doing this.
Went around. I would have you drive by the house in my truck and measure the actual sound on a video for our client remotely.
I would talk. I would say lines in the room next door. We'd turn off the HVAC and turn it back on, and just everything.
Right, so we could hear and we'd hold it up against the vent to see how loud the HVAC was. And ultimately, at one point, I felt like, okay, I personally don't need this level of testing for noise, but this matters to our client, and our client is respectful and polite about it, but also very particular. So we're going to do sound pressure level testing because that mattered to our client, even though none of the noise he noticed would have bothered me.
I don't know. I don't think he listens, but if he listens, I now have an aversion to squeaky floors, and I just will never be right again. I notice any squeaky floor ever. No.
I definitely pay more attention to sound too. And that's one of the reasons I often talk to my buyers about their sensitivity, because they may not have any sensitivity. And if you're coming from a busy city, New York, San Francisco, Boston, you're not going to, like, what constitutes a busy road in Boulder is going to make you laugh.
Good point.
Right? Like, this is nothing compared to what it sounds like anywhere in northern New Jersey on any given rush hour.
Yeah.
Like, right? Or anywhere in Manhattan. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
There's no quiet locations in Manhattan. I'm sorry.
When I moved here from New Zealand, I thought, like, the suburbs where I live now were too noisy. Like, I had trouble falling asleep because so it's just all tiered, right?
Right. Well, we also have buyers that can't sleep unless there is background noise. So sound is something that's very personal. It is something that, if it matters, so the bottom line is, if I'm your buyer's agent and it matters to you, it matters to me. And I want to encourage our buyers to be thorough in their due diligence. I feel like that's part of fiduciary responsibility. And that's why I developed this checklist. And this checklist is not inclusive of every possible area. In fact, it says that on the checklist is, please don't sue me. I'm just showing you some things you might want to think about. And it includes things that a lot of buyers don't, like crime maps and sex offender status and talking to the neighbors, because that's your cheapest form of due diligence. It costs you nothing, and you could do it before, right?
And they'll tell you everything. I mean, not guaranteed, but boy, do they spill.
They like to talk. They may not always tell you the truth, because maybe they are working for the seller, okay? Socially working for the seller. Maybe there's all sorts of, but it's information that costs you nothing other than your time to gather. In some cases, when there's bidding wars imminent, the neighbors are the buddies with the seller, and becoming friends with them and really polite and warm can land you the deal. So, all right. So that's probably enough for the due diligence topic, Hamish. I feel like we've covered some of the basics. We've covered the primary and the secondary inspections. We've covered unique testing, like mold. We have not talked about permits, radon, or expansive soils, or any other of the...
We have talked about radon and expansive soils in other podcasts. I feel like, Well,
let's talk about permits, and then we'll wrap this up today. So why is permits... And permits are a very rare thing for buyer's agents or buyers in general to go explore. Because, hey, if it's done, right? And the answer is, well, there's some risk for you by not checking the permits. Now, a lot of basement remodels are done without a permit. And that's, in most cases, not a big deal. In some cases, could be a very big deal. It all depends on your intention for the property and the level of attentiveness of the bureaucracy that grants permits.
Well said.
I'll put it that way politely. Like, if you're in Louisville or Lafayette, it's a little easier. But if you're in the city of Boulder, and you have maybe. So you're in Boulder and you have a whole bunch of unpermitted work, and then you go to get a permit, there's a chance that the inspector is going to notice your unpermitted basement kitchen, for example, and not grant you the permit for your remodel until you deconstruct the unpermitted basement. And so that is the city of Boulder. Brutal. Okay, and we've seen this. I've seen people buy a house that had an unpermitted ADU, a carriage house style property, right? And try to Airbnb it and find out that not only was it unpermitted, now they have to deconstruct it because they have photos and advertising showing all the cool, sexy features that should never have existed in this property. And then they list it again 2 years later because they got so caught up with the city bureaucracy and all the fines and pain. And you literally see where the shower was above the garage. And you see the kitchen where the sink was because it's been painted around. It's all gone. It's all been ripped out. But that's where it all was. I happen to know of an individual, I won't mention their name, or the politician involved, who likely triggered this when he moved into the neighborhood. But he had an unpermitted carriage house apartment that he had been renting out for over a decade to a friend of the family. It had never been advertised. And this person one day got a knock on the door that we want to inspect above your carriage house. We think you're renting out an illegal apartment. and he ended up doing a middle of the night wall construction to hide the bathroom. Literally, I'm like, the bathroom has disappeared. They built a wall, drywalled it,
there's nothing behind that.
It, hid it. Literally, the paint, you could smell the paint in the room.
So
it was wet, and it was hidden. He enclosed his own bathroom in the middle of the night, and if this person's listening, I'm not even revealing your name because I don't want you getting in any further trouble over this.
You are.
So that's just emblematic of one potential issue of permits. The other potential issue is an open permit that was not closed out.
Yep.
And this is one that almost certainly the readers and listeners and most real estate agents don't know or don't want you to know. And if you have a house with an open permit and you go to pull another permit, they will make you complete that original permit. And they will not make you complete it to the standards of the day. It now needs to meet today's standards.
Wicked.
And it may be extremely cost prohibitive or impossible to meet today's standards. So what happens is sometimes somebody pulls a permit. Maybe the first contractor walked off the job and you hired the second contractor to finish the job. And the second contractor took the money and ran when the job was done and the permit was never closed out. Or maybe the homeowner started the project, as I have done, and found out the costs for the permitting were really expensive. And I sucked it up and did what the city wanted and got the permit closed because I knew this issue would come up in the future. But if you don't do that, you just finish the project in the middle of the night, guess what? You have a major problem on your hands if you ever try to pull a permit for something else, because they see this in the file.
Likely you will, right?
Likely you will. We almost bought a house, Hamish. This
I know
is before
this
your
one.
time, right? And it turned out the seller had the file was full of seller misbehavior, including notes about how he bulldozed a road to where he wanted to build the house without even the neighbor's permission. This is up in Boulder County, outside of Nederland. And then this architect from Florida, I have a whole folder. I might just anonymously mail it to the current owner because I really wonder if he got any of this information from the listing agent. We terminated on the deal because of all this. But the seller, the original owner, filed for a cabin and a garage and a deck overlooking Gross Reservoir on like 11 and a half acres of land. And for whatever regulatory reason, they had to give up the deck. And so the notes, which were initialed or signed by one of the heads of the planning department at the county, said deck deleted in lieu of garage. Okay. You go look at the house and what do you see? The garage and the deck. So immediately after the permit was closed for the house, in the 70s, the guy built the deck. And the deck was the selling feature of the house. And it was unpermitted. And I was like, great. And so was the entire primary bedroom behind the house. So after he built the cottage, he also built on stilts, because he's from Florida, a primary suite.
Of course, on stilts.
And when I looked at the house, I'm like, this house is really interesting. Why are there electrical wires poking out of the walls and not in junction boxes? This is weird.
Mountains, baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the mountains in the 70s. Build what you want. No one's looking. Well, today we have satellite photography. We have a lot more attention to detail. A lot of neighbors that are watching what you're doing. And so the odds of getting away with this behavior are far less. But the implications for acquiring a property with all this unpermitted work were going to be really expensive. Yeah. So we ended up killing that deal. And you should too, if you're not able to extract a concession commensurate with the pain you're going to experience to bring this property into compliance.
Good point. And I think Boulder's got a pretty easy permit lookup. Anywhere else, it's the planning and development department you want to call if you're curious.
In the city of Boulder.
But just for cities, right? Like I would call Westminster's planning and development. Or that
it depends on what the name is. I mean, some people it's just called the building department, the permit office. I mean, every municipality is a little different. The county has a different name than the city. The bottom line is, and sometimes it's easy, like you mentioned, you can look up the city of Boulder permits online. Sometimes it's very difficult. You have to make a phone call.
I had to do rabbit holes to find mine, yeah.
And sometimes, Louisville and Lafayette have been very nice. Even though their online systems, frankly, suck, their humans are amazing. And they get back to you right away. And you can even go. So we used to actually do this in person. We used to take our buyer to the building department right above Mustard's Last Stand in the city of Boulder.
Is that where it's
Hamish,
at?
and sit with them. Yeah, I would sit with them and go through the folder to see what they had on file. Now you have to schedule an appointment to do that. We don't really do that with buyers unless they really want us to, in which case I will go again and sit at the permit office. But during COVID, all that got shut down. So I haven't.
And they're
done it
online
since before
systems at this
COVID.
point. I mean, Boulder really kind of shows it how it's done. If you check out, you're doing due diligence for Boulder, and then you do due diligence for a neighboring city. Boulder's pretty impressive with what they've achieved, and it's cool to see neighboring cities start to fall in line too. Yeah.
Right. So ask your agent if they're willing to help you with your due diligence and see what they say. And if their answer is that's not something we do, you may want to get a better agent, because there are a lot of giant holes to fall into.
Oh, yeah.
And the cost of poor due diligence will fall to you as a buyer. You may want to, do your homework.
Nobody wants a gotcha after they move in.
Unless it's a good, gotcha by itself sounds bad. No one wants a discovery that's negative. You don't want to find out the neighbor next door is a registered sex offender when you have small children and you just bought the house. I'm sorry, you just don't, right? That's reality. And I know there's all these flaws with the whole sex offender registry, and we're not going down that rabbit hole. No. And you don't care to. You don't
That's
even need to
yeah.
care. Like, as a parent, you're just not going to care. So you're just not going to want to buy that house in the first place.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Well, not our longest.
Well, we're not ending on that particular note. We're going to do a little wrap up.
Well, Osmond's silence is
what have you
deafening,
got to say,
and
Hamish?
therefore that must be my cue to do the wrap up here. Dear listener, we're approaching an hour and 46 minutes, and it has been an absolute pleasure helping you approach real estate perhaps a little differently than you might have otherwise. Our whole mission here is to help you make a smarter real estate decision. If you're in Colorado and you're in the market, give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out and find what you need. And if you like what we're about, you can find us on other social media as well. Osmond's personal channel on Instagram is Osmond Parvez. House Einstein is, of course, House Einstein. And same with YouTube, Twitter, all sorts. And pretty much where you look us up, you'll find us. We got a newsletter. Osmond touched on that ever so slightly. It might be is it bi-monthly every other month, or is that twice a month?
It's summer. I'm slammed.
It'll come out when it comes out.
Newsletters come after our clients, and I'm sorry, I got to drop everything for our clients. So if you're mad about the newsletter, I don't know.
It'll
pick
come.
up the phone and call me and hire me to be your agent, because then you're my top priority. That's just how it is. But I appreciate the guilt.
I wasn't even trying
on the newsletter.
Anyhow.
I'm just susceptible. I'm just easily susceptible to even a hint of guilt. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I deeply appreciate all the feedback and the comments that you've shared. Deeply appreciate you listening. And if you have feedback for us, we are all ears. You can leave comments. You can share the podcast with your friends and family, like and subscribe, all those good things. We deeply appreciate it. And we look forward to catching you again in the near future.
Perfect.